Alright, so earlier this morning, I was doing my usual brainstorm, and one of the things that crossed my mind was my fights, the ones that we've had here on the channel. And I'm not talking about just my casual bouts, but the fights that I actually map out. The Knights of the Round Table versus the Argonauts, and the recent Battle Royale. The main reason that I made the Knights of the Round one was because I wanted to get back to me creative-wise. So I said, let me do something that's completely left field and just try something new. I'm not a writer. I don't write anything. I don't write fan fictions. I don't read fan fictions. So everything I did was just based on what I've seen before as a consumer. So the way that I looked at it, okay, well, if they don't like it, then I'll just make the adjustments and see what I can work on later. Now, the first time I did it, I somewhat expected the results because it's the Knights of the Round, it's the Argonauts. Who doesn't want to see that? That's something that's been on the palette for a while, right? But then I do the recent Battle Royale, and it seems like everybody enjoyed that one too. They may have not agreed with who won, but for the most part, they liked the way that it came about. So clearly it's like, okay, I might be working with something here. So I can't help but wonder, what do you guys think is a good fight? What do you value in a fight? And we can make an entire list of different things to hit on what a fight should be, but for the sake of this topic, I'll just go into 3 main ones for myself and let everybody take it from there. And I do want to preface this by saying I'm asking what makes a good fight in the Fate Stay Night franchise in general, not just Stay Night. So for me, and this should also be apparent by the way that things came together, is that I'm a big fan of the unprecedented. I love when you don't know what's gonna happen. And I know that sounds crazy, but there's a lot of fights that do the same thing over and over again. There's not anything wrong with that. I just feel like imagination wise, and especially with all the different things that can go on in Fate, it's like putting yourself in a creative box to not explore any of them and just repeat those things over and over. Like, how many times have we seen a sword clash? How many times have I seen somebody get punched in the face? And realistically, I'll never get tired of that, but you get what I mean. How many times have I seen somebody get punched in the face? How many times have we seen a beam struggle? How many times have you seen somebody do a barrage of arrows and then the other person just magically dodge all of them? So when I do go into mapping things out, I always want to try something new. And that's why if you see me do something, I'm probably not gonna do that again. Or if I do it, I'll at least hit it from a different angle. I just feel like that brings a lot of value when I watch things. And then I just get hit with this curveball, and it reminds me how imaginative and fun writing can get, at least fighting wise. Another point, and this is probably on the list for everybody, is the theme. What's the thematic value of the fight? Now, some people don't care. Right? Some people, they like fights that just look good. It doesn't have to mean anything at all. It doesn't even have to make sense. But I'm always partial to a fight that has some type of backbone to it, and they're not just fighting for the sake of fighting. And I'll give some examples. Shiro versus Gilgamesh. I don't like that fight. I know the entire community loves that fight. Everybody loves it, and they could scream it to the moon. I'll be the only one that says that. I do not care. I don't like it. And they'll be like, well, you should have used the novel. I'm talking about the novel. Just because I put the animation on the screen doesn't mean that I'm not talking about the novel. I don't want people to get bored, obviously. And I know people are gonna come out the woodworks and be like, oh, that's because you're this. Shiro is one of my favorite characters, and I like him more than Gilgamesh. So you can't do that either. Sig versus Krana, for example. I don't like that fight. Oh, this happened with Gil because he's arrogant. And then I look to my left and I see what Sig does to Krana, knowing his body, and I'm like, okay, Krana's not arrogant. Oh, well, that's different. It's always different, right? What I do like is I love Shiro versus Emiya, because even though that's not an actual fight, thematically it stands on more principle than any 2 random dudes banging swords could ever. That's one of the reasons why UB-Dub is such a heavy route for me. Shiro versus Kirei, specifically the novel, amazing fight from front to back. The music, the meaning, all of that, amazing. Kiritsugu versus Kirei. when you talk about a protagonist fight, I feel like that's how it's done. That is a chef's kiss to fighting. Just brilliant. Again, from front to back. They didn't waste no time. They didn't do any talking. Not only was it themed, but the choreography was good, and the conclusion was nothing that you would expect. It was very left field. And I'll just make a fight list later because that's something that I've been meaning to do anyway. But things like Tiamat versus everybody, us going against the Fairy Knights, Darius versus everybody, all of those things are great fights. Chiron versus Achilles, not just when they were fighting on the plane, but all together. Again, there's so many to go through. We'll be here all day. I just want to keep it close to home. Another example that I want to give is something that was trending before. It was Gear 5 Luffy, and I seen all these people talking about it. Oh, look at the animation, look at these whacked out sounds that they're making in the scenes. So I couldn't help but look at it. Now, I don't watch One Piece at all. I couldn't even get past the first arc of One Piece, so I have no context whatsoever. And I'm watching this fight and this transformation that he's having, and it was fire. Listen guys, I'm not trying to be the unicorn. I'm not trying to be the eyeball out. I don't care for, I'm the only one with this opinion. But from what I saw, in terms of being interesting, in terms of being unprecedented, like I just mentioned, it had all of that because I'm looking at it without actually knowing what's going on, and I'm trying to figure things out. Whereas if it was just some regular fight, I would know exactly what was going to happen before I even saw it. As a matter of fact, some fights you can look away from the anime and look back at the screen and you'll still know what happened. You don't even gotta watch it. It's that bad. But the whole Luffy thing, everything was just so weird, and that's what made it so great to me. It came with these ideas that I really don't see too often. It was creative. And then the last point I'm gonna get into, and this is going back to the fight just being a spectacle, was the fight enjoyable? And there's many fights like that. I mean, it could be something as simple as Gilgamesh versus Enkidu in Strange Fate, which we just saw animated not too long ago. Wasn't complex, didn't really have any meaning other than two old friends meeting up, but the value is that it was enjoyable. And if it's enjoyable, personally, I feel like there are times where all can be forgiven. And if you watch Bleach, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because realistically, for a show like Bleach, you could pick apart Bleach all day from a writing standpoint. But the reality of the matter is, it's so entertaining and has so many cool things going on that nobody cares. That's the brilliant thing about it. It's a beautiful mess, but that's when it really gets things going. That's really the star of the show. All these different factions, all these different characters with these weird abilities. It's just a good time. I love bouts like Flat and Jack the Ripper versus Hurt, or Herc and Boz versus Ishtar and Humbaba. Yo, when Hurt was fighting against Humbaba and shot his arrows and the arrows turned into Stymphalian birds, that's my jam. Because it's so weird, it's random. But it's not so random to the point where it's like, why did he even write that? There's a lot of characters that I feel like are portrayed as stronger than they should be. And then there's a lot of characters that should be strong and they get done really bad. I'm not going to get into who. I think it should be fairly obvious. The people that I'm talking about, there's a lot of them. It's a whole list. But whatever the case, that plays a big part into the enjoyment factor. Because I can only suspend my disbelief so much till it gets to the point where it's like, alright nigga, like let's be real. Like let's be honest. Like is this really happening to this person realistically? I doubt it. But since one person needed to win and the other person had to lose, the authors find a way to weave that together. That has nothing to do with Gil, by the way. But there's many others. What do you guys look for in a fight? What do you find value in? What really keeps you going? Is it the spectacle? Because like I said, it doesn't have to be themed. It doesn't have to be complex. It could just be enjoyable. There's nothing wrong with that. I've watched plenty of fights without context, and they were good fights, and they'd be even better if I knew what was going on. Many of those are things that were just sent to me, but you get what I mean. And then there's the other side of the spectrum where I'm real heavy on the meaning. There doesn't even have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be mental. I like when people play chess. Johan and Dr. Temma from Monster. Light Yagami versus L from Death Note. Lelouch from Code Geass. Those types of fights just fall in line with some of my favorite genres anyway, because they really really make you think. And my main thing here is that when I do map these fights out going forward, I can maybe take some of these things into consideration. I won't change the way that I do the fights, but I'll at least say, hey, that's a point that I didn't really think of. Of course, they can't be thematic because many of them are off the cuff or commissions, but everything else still stands. And I chose to leave out things like art and animation because those are really arbitrary factors that could fall directly on a bad studio, and that's not really my point here. I'm more so speaking on the writing of the fight itself.